We still have a few people trickling in. Maybe I'll give them a few more minutes. Hey everyone, we're just giving it a couple more minutes for people to come joining. It looks like there's still some people coming into the unhangout, and then we'll get started. Give it till 5 after. If you can comment in the chat box or the chat in the middle of the lobby and just let us know how things are going. I'm curious to hear about how people's first prototype went using human-centered design, and in particular, if there were some things you learned which surprised you. And tomorrow, we'll be talking more about that, but I will wait and hold off on giving you too many more details for 1 more minute. Okay, I'm going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 4, I believe, of our online seminar. Today is a little bit different than some of our previous ones, and I will be introducing our special guest in a minute, but I wanted to take a few minutes right at the start just to lay out what's happening over the rest of this week. So tomorrow we will be having our feedback seminar, which will be conducted by Philip Schmidt, whom you've met, my colleague here at the Media Lab, and Jacqueline Strecker, who is the Learn Lab manager for the UNHCR. So they will be giving you a few of the teams, as we did last time, feedback on what they turned in on Sunday and on sort of their use of human-centered design. And then you have another deliverable, which is due on Sunday. There's more information about that in GitLab. Basically, what we're asking you to do is really user test whatever it is you've created to get feedback from people, whether those are colleagues, friends, family. If you are connected to an NGO, you might be able to work with some students, etc. But to really go out into the field and get feedback. We're not actually asking you to then create a new prototype. That felt like a bit too much, but to really reflect on what you've learned. And there's a series of questions. Again, that's all on GitLab, and that will you'll be able to look there and see what exactly we're asking for. As always, if you have questions, Mattermost, when I'm happy to answer them there. Today, though, we're doing something different. We wanted to introduce you to a project that is already doing some of the kinds of work that we've been thinking about, that's already using technology to support learners in the Middle East, and some of the learners they're supporting are in fact refugees. So we have with us Sharif Hawa, who's an engineer at Edraak, which is an Arabic language MOOC platform based in Amman in Jordan. And he will be telling us a little bit about Edraak and also about a blended learning platform they're building, and he'll be reflecting on some of the operation or the outstanding design concerns they have and how they've used sort of a human-centered design framework to approach those. So hopefully this will both give you some more context on how technology is already being used and in the Middle East and in Arabic, which is very exciting, but then also a little bit of insight into their process and how they go about doing what they're actually doing. So I will turn it over to Sharif. You are live, Sharif.
All right, thanks so much, Genevieve, and welcome everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with you today. I'm actually speaking to you from Amman in Jordan, where I believe maybe many of you already are. I've been enjoying the rain today, just like many others of you are. And today I'm very excited to actually be talking to you about some of the recent advances that we've been doing at Edraak, and also project a big component of our work at Edraak on human-centered design. I'm going to start this talk by giving you a brief overview about Edraak, specifically from the engineering team perspective, what we do in terms of product design, product development. I'm going to touch base both on the product design and the engineering side, as well as on the educational side, because at the end, to do something meaningful in a field like education, it's really about being able to connect both worlds together. And then we are going to be talking in more detail about a new project that we are working on in conjunction with google.org. This project is new to the region and is new to Edraak as well. And so as you can imagine, we are in the middle of making some really important decisions about how we're going to design some of the products that we're about to launch next year. And so we are then going to give it to you guys so you can share us this design thought process. And actually, I'm going to bring forward one of the design problems that we're actually thinking about now quite heavily, so we can all share thoughts about this and, particularly practice how to connect the engineering and product design world with the education world. So I'll actually start a screen share here. And Genevieve, you please just confirm that you can see my screen. Just give me a moment.
Yes, I will. It's the green arrow up on the upper left-hand side.
All right.
All good.
Great. Okay. So we'll eventually get from Edraak and what we're doing, down to the topic of blended learning and how Edraak wishes to provide blended learning at scale throughout, the Arab-speaking countries, mainly because the content that we provide on Edraak is in Arabic, mainly. So a brief introduction about Edraak. Edraak is part of the Queen Rania Foundation for Education and Development. Our headquarters are in Amman, Jordan. And Edraak has been established actually in 2013. We have been actually providing courses on our own platform since 2014. And Edraak so far has been a MOOC platform that basically targets higher education. So if you go to Edraak, you are going to log in and then you have a list of courses you are enrolled in. So you can see this list of courses, you can go to any course and you can actually start learning. So what you see right here on the screen is, on the left, you have this content navigation bar. In the rest of the screen, you actually selected one of the lessons, so you're starting to watch the video for that lesson. And I expect maybe a lot of people are already familiar with what MOOCs are, so that's exactly what Edraak has been about. But the special thing is that we've been targeting mainly more adult learners. Our content is targeted to people who are either in universities, or have graduated and are actually now in the professional field, looking for job improvement, changing careers, or simply, learning just for fun or self-growth. Since we launched actually our platform in 2014, Edraak has so far reached 1.4 million registrants across the Arab region. The top 5 countries we have users from are in order Egypt, Algeria, Jordan, Morocco, and Saudi Arabia. And we have as well learners from all of the other Arab countries as well as some other countries in the world. We have 70 plus unique courses on Edraak so far. Stay tuned for more in 2018. Our Edraak team is actually now 29 members. Learners on Edraak have completed courses and exported certificates more than 150,000 times so far. And we have 1.9 million fans on Facebook. So that's just a very brief quantitative view to where Edraak stands today. And actually, in terms of activity, Edraak has expanded over the past few years to offer not only courses to independent learners, but Edraak has also entered a number of partnerships with universities and other organizations across the region. And so in Jordan specifically, Edraak has been partnering with universities to create SPOCs, or small private online courses. These are sort of similar to MOOCs, which are massive open online courses. In terms of content, they look the same, except that a SPOC is usually a MOOC that you take and run within a private group of students. So the biggest example of this, if you take like a MOOC or create a course and offer it to university students, say second year in Jordanian university, for example. So Edraak has been building these partnerships because we realized that there is a huge opportunity, not just in reaching learners in their free time, but actually by channeling technology into learners' university education as well, and eventually into school education, as we're going to see. So far, Edraak has reached a number of partnerships in Jordan, including the German Jordanian University, Arab Open University, Amman Arab University, PSUT, the Jordanian University, JUST, and the Hashemite University. And we're also expanding in partnerships with other universities across the Arab region, including Saudi Arabia, Egypt, etc. Another front that Edraak is also working on is in providing online learning or learning solutions in general to displaced communities, and particularly with refugees. And this is an area where we are really trying to invest more. We work with UNHCR, we work with the Danish Refugee Council, Norwegian Refugee Council, to try to bring Edraak's courses into the refugee camps and try to create online learning communities around these courses. We've had pilots in Zaatari camp in Jordan, the Azraq camp, as well as some Emirati camps. So far in Jordanian camps, we've had over 2,000 learners in refugee camps, working with the Norwegian Refugee Council and CARE. And we've offered courses on employability skills, teacher training, child mental health, and conversational English, sorry. Edraak's courses have been used in blended learning sessions where learners basically went to classrooms in some of these centers in the camps and watched courses over there, watched online courses in the presence of facilitators, and then conducted the exercises and exported certificates at the end. So some of the hardware that was used is called the Ideas Box. So this is basically deployed in the camp. We transfer some of our educational content to that box. And then when that box goes into the camp where probably no internet connection is available, you can play back the content. You can, in this picture we see here, people are watching the content on a shared TV screen, but also you can connect to the Ideas Box and stream the content from your own tablet, for instance. So we did some follow-up studies, definitely, to try to evaluate the impact that this has had on learners in refugee camps. And our studies so far have targeted 87 participants from 3 camps. Over 90% of the learners have reported that they enjoyed the experience and they are willing to participate and take online courses again. Over 70% reported that they generally enjoyed the online learning experience. And the number one reason that they cited for taking Edraak courses in the future, they said, would be to improve their basic skills for finding work. And this is a huge concern among learners in refugee camps. One of the learners, explicitly mentioned, that they are grateful that they were able to access a learning opportunity and basically reconnect to their learning. So that was something, it means that we are hopefully on the right track, and we intend to work more and more with refugees, because this is one of the most needy learner segments that we can work with in the current time. So the focus has been, as I mentioned, so far on higher ed. But in 2017, specifically in May, Her Majesty Queen Rania met with Eric Schmidt from Google in Zeitgeist in London, and they decided it's about time to launch a large-scale K-12 education initiative that spans the Arab region. So basically, the idea is that Edraak is currently working with Google.org to provide K-12 content in Arabic for all of the Arabic-speaking countries. So we are basically working on 3 fronts currently heavily in Edraak. The first front is content. So basically we are working over the next few years to provide online educational content for grades 1 to 12, spanning the 6 subjects, including mathematics, science, English, Arabic, and then for more advanced grades, you have, for instance, physics, chemistry, and eventually biology as well. So we also want to try to provide this content, in a way that actually people are going to consume. And this is, the number one thing that always has to come to mind when you are designing a new product that you're going to launch at scale. The central question has to always be, okay, how many people are going to find this product suitable? And so as we are all familiar, each of the Arab countries probably uses a different curriculum at each grade. Grade 7 in Jordan could be a little bit different than grade 7 in Syria or Egypt. So how can we basically create educational products that people can consume across the Arab world despite the differences that exist in the national curricula? So the approach that we took was to basically think of how to create these learning objects in such a way that they are modular and reusable. And by that we mean that even though the curricula could differ from country to country, if you look at differentiation, the first topic people study in differentiation in Egypt is very similar to the first topic they study in differentiation in Jordan. Differentiation, which in Arabic is tafadul. Takamul or integration is similar. So we found that even though things appear in different grades in different countries, the actual content, if broken down sufficiently, starts to become the same across the Arab world. And so we said, okay, the proper way to go around this product design problem would be to basically design the educational content in terms of what we call learning objects. Learning objects are like, 3 to 6 minute long videos that include some practice. And then you will basically take these learning objects and you will stitch them together to create the national curricula for the different Arab-speaking countries. So after we are done creating these learning objects, we are going to create a special program that is targeted for, let's say grade 7 or 8 or 9 in Jordan, other programs targeting the different grades in Egypt, other programs targeting the different grades in Syria. And we would be able to do this without really recreating, all of the educational content. We are just taking ready-made things and stitching them together. So this is basically the content pillar. Edraak, in terms of technology, we recognize that the technology that we have so far is not very suitable for the sort of task that we'll be working on in K-12. Edraak has been using Open edX so far, which is working successfully for more adult learners. But the model for Open edX is that every course has its own content. You create specific content for a certain MOOC or a certain course. You launch that course. Yeah, you can optionally rerun this course, several times in the future, so that future learners can also engage in a full course experience. But then, the course is the course. I mean, you're not expected to really change the content or the sequence. Now, that's very different from what we have in K-12, because in K-12, we have some content that we want to share across different Arab countries, but in different ways. And so this was one thing that basically, it pointed us towards building a new technology platform. But honestly, just how we put the content together and serve it weren't the only challenges that we've been facing so far. We also want to make sure that we can give K-12 education in the Arab world the attention it needs in terms of instructional design. Now, teaching a grade 3 student online is very, very different than teaching a graduate student online. The platform or interface that works for someone who has graduated college should be very different from someone, let's say, in grade 1. Even within K-12, it's pretty challenging because grade 1 interfaces should look different from grade 3 interfaces, which should also look different from interfaces for grades 6 to 12. So that's also one thing that needs to be taken into consideration. Now, in terms of Open edX and how MOOCs work for more adult learners are expected to be able to navigate content. Like, I'm sure any one of us who has studied something online, even if they are YouTube videos, we know how to, go through the videos in sequence. But then if you face a point in a certain video that you don't understand, and that point depended on something that was explained in an earlier video, the adult learner knows that they need to go back to the previous video, rewatch that part, maybe even watch it from external sources if they figure out that they can't understand, and then go back to the video they were originally on and continue studying the course. we call this, self-learning abilities, and these are usually not available at younger ages. And so even, if you just create this content and launch it on the inappropriate platform, the results could not actually live up. So we decided, okay, how do teachers work in schools? Because the platform and the technology, in that case, needs to learn a lot from how, from what works actually in other settings currently. And we find that, teachers in schools, private tutors in lessons, depend a lot on, changing their instruction based on how students understand and how much they have understood so far. And so the new technology that we are building also needs to feature things like, if you did well on this exercise, you will go to this video, but if you didn't do well, you are going to go to another video. So this is, we put this under the notion of, designing the platform to motivate and engage students and make sure that, you always route students down learning paths where, that are appropriate for their own knowledge states and the way they prefer to learn. And so we want to create a platform that succeeds in engaging students, keeping them engaged, motivating them to learn. But also we recognize that, in K-12, you don't just need videos and tests and exercises. You actually need more. In terms of instructional design, sometimes a single lesson in K-12, to design it really in a good way, you need to have a video that explains the first part of the concept, and then teach students how to apply this concept just to make sure they understand it well by giving them a practice question, and then giving them another chunk of video to deliver the next piece of the concept, and then another exercise, and then a next video. And all of this is actually to teach the students just one concept in the proper way. Now, this is very different than what happens with adult learners, where you can just give them 5 videos and then a wrap-up exercise at the end of the chapter, because you're sure, learners are going to go back and forth between the videos and the exercise, and this is what K-12 students do not have. All right, so also keeping this, we refer to this usually as the instructional design component. How can you basically design the content on the platform so that it naturally guides the students through the set of activities that they need to do in order to achieve the understanding? And this is something, as I mentioned, we learn basically by mimicking what teachers do already in schools in terms of explaining and then asking students questions. And based on how students respond, they can either move on to the next topic, or they can, take a step back and repeat a concept that they feel students did not understand. So Open edX has also been targeted mainly for learners who are learning alone, on their own. But we want really for, the K-12 content to be used across the Arab world in as many forms as possible. One of these forms is learners, learning on their own. But there are other modes which we are going to refer to as blended learning modes, which I'm going to explain in a few minutes. The other thing, which is really a huge opportunity that we have, now that actually we are creating this sort of content in the Arab world, and we are planning to reach out to students, teachers, parents, and help them use the content in different ways. There's a lot, we always have to think of, okay, now I'm going to be getting data, a continuous stream of data from people who are learning on the platform. And eventually, as product designers and product owners, we should always direct some thought to how can we make our products better and better, right? And in terms of education, this means we can launch a set of open education resources that learners are then going to start using, right? And then I'm going to see, when learners view these videos, how well they master the content and how well they do on the exercises and tests. But then by looking at where learners actually engaged with the videos, where they rewinded the videos, which questions they struggled on, we have a huge opportunity here, which is to take all of this data back into Edraak, for instance, and use it to determine which are the concepts that need to be reworked in terms of instructional design. You can identify the concepts where students struggle the most, and then say, okay, we need to recreate the learning objects for these concepts because it seems students are struggling there, right? So we refer to this as data-informed content design. And this is also one of the trends that, it's not just in education, it's in human-centered design in general. Why deprive yourself of, you know, the truth that is basically coming to you at a continuous basis through the data that you're getting from your users. And so this also has an important projection on when you're creating the technology. You need to make sure that, you know, you can embed as many, you know, data probes as you can, you know, as much as actually is allowable and, you know, and ethical and, you know, acceptable by your users. You should try to learn about the user's experience through getting data through your apps. And this is something that's really important because sometimes, like, you know, what we test in Jordan turns out not to work in Egypt, or, you know, what works for well for females doesn't work well for males, for instance. And really, it's important to cover all of these edge cases just using, you know, like your 20 test users. And so you continue to improve by looking at the data that comes from the other users as well. Now, the third pillar of this big project that Edraak is working on with Google currently is the activation. You created the content, you created the technology. In order for all of this really to pay back, we need to make sure that many, many people actually use these in the Arab world, right? So I want to make sure that this technology and this content reaches students not just in private schools, but students in public schools, students in Jordan and in Egypt and in Syria, and students in camps, as well as students, you know, in the more like, you know, brick and mortar schools, etc., across the region. So we want to engage, you know, all of the different communities that are involved, as well as, of course, engaging the research community in the region, so they can contribute further to the design of the technology and the quality of the education content that is provided. We are hoping over the next year to provide release a total of 1,500 open educational resources, mainly in math and English, and then create similar OERs or open educational resources in the other subjects as well that we usually see in K-12. We are hoping to reach 1.5 million K-12 learners across the Arab region or more, and basically enable new forms and modes of incorporation of educational technology adoption in schools. And to explain this point, because this is really the most important point we have on mind now, which is we are going to create technology that teachers are going to use in classrooms, right? But we also have to recognize that there is a huge adoption gap currently in the Arab region. Teachers don't usually, you know, have necessarily the technology now or use it. And so introducing the technology is likely to come, you know, at some struggle at first. So you are going to be, you know, maybe sometimes targeting teachers that might not really believe in online learning and, you know, just believe in conventional teaching as being the ideal form of knowledge transfer. So how can we, you know, onboard these teachers and convince them of the value that they can gain through using the technology? But even if the teacher is excited about the technology but is not really tech savvy, if the teacher hasn't really used technology a lot, right, then will teachers be able to really use these technologies in their classrooms? And this is, you know, a big part of human-centered design. We don't want to design technology for people who are already up there and probably have technology to use. Our main target users are people who are not currently using technology, and this poses a lot of challenges for us. So, of course, just, you know, to touch on this point, definitely, you know, we shouldn't be undertaking this project unless we are sure that in terms of adoption in schools, Edraak will be able to work with ministries to actually provide technology to schools that don't have them. So if we talk about public schools, you know, probably teachers are not in a financial position to provide tablets or phones to the students themselves. And so a big part of the success of this project hinges on partnering with the right people. So in our case, we are working with the ministries of education and working with refugee camps, for instance, which possess devices that they can then transfer to teachers so they can use in their classrooms. Now, I want to actually, this was sort of like, sorry for the long introduction, but this was mainly about Edraak and to set some context about what is the work that we are doing right now. And I want now to start focusing more actually on the technology that Edraak is currently building.
Can I ask you two questions from the chat, Sharif?
Yes.
So
yeah.
Florian wanted to know what kind of hardware you're using for the offline server that you talked about.
Right, that's a great question. So usually, Florian, the most of the online learning platforms are developed and deployed over machines that support Linux, that run Linux, because Linux is the most conventional operating system where you can set up servers, etc. And the really nice thing is that on the other side, you have a lot of hardware components, including, for instance, the ideas box, including even, any standalone computer that you can connect to a Wi-Fi hotspot and make this computer act as the server inside a room, for instance, or inside a building. So as long as your machine supports Linux, which basically, if you're talking about Ideas Box, for instance, it supports Linux out of the box, because it's expected that many of the users of the Ideas Box and the services it's going to provide are going to be based on Linux. So we've used Ideas Box so far. We've used laptops hooked to Wi-Fi servers to also provide some distribution of the platform. So we basically installed the platform on this box or this laptop connected to a Wi-Fi hotspot, and then basically it acts as the server in that region.
And then
so I hope that.
Thank you. Yazan wanted to know a little bit more. You mentioned different things that worked for men and or women and don't work for men, or vice versa. And he was wondering if you could elaborate on how a teaching approach could impact genders differently.
Right, that's a great question, and there's a lot of research and a lot of honestly very interesting as well as shocking results sometimes. But let me try to very briefly talk about one of the main sources of gender gaps that we see so far. One of the major gender gaps is what we call stereotype threats. And this is something that is, very, very widespread in the Arab world, unfortunately, and it's a challenge that we have to work with. It's basically the notion that, in some cultures, that are not like, let me say, sorry for the word illuminated. Some cultures basically, would teach girls from when they are young that, your eventual goal is just to go through school and then, get married, and then basically, that's basically the climax of expectations, basically. That's the top of the expectations. Whereas, men are showcased where, they need to go to college, graduate, find jobs because they are going to, So this creates this sense, unfortunately, since younger age, with many females in such regions that, education is not really something critical. And by the time they start to realize, that basically education is about all aspects of life, and that, what they were taught earlier is, doesn't uphold really, or like, females, for instance, can't perform as well as males. Now, as soon as the female grows up and recognizes that this is not actually true, and this is all like, just been like folklore rumors, already they had missed on some earlier learning opportunities. And this continues to create possibly some gap, as learners move ahead in their learning lives. So this is just, one of these sources. Now, the proper way to basically to address this and similar challenges, psychological challenges we refer to, is usually through mixing the educational content with some psychological interventions. So you imagine that the teacher is like a doctor who is delivering knowledge, as long as, as well as, some dosage of psychological guidance to the students to help overcome some of the false beliefs that they have, like gender-related stereotypes, for instance. Right? So I hope this shows just, one example of how gender gaps arise in educational settings. And this is like one thing in Edraak, which also we plan to try to work on as we target many learners in the Arab region, which is, how can it be not just about the educational content, but also about helping learners develop better learning habits and better beliefs about how they can learn and what they can actually achieve.
Makes sense.
So I hope this answers the question as well.
Yeah.
Moving back now to my slides. So by actually studying how people engage with online learning, we figured out that people use online learning materials in different ways. We will all be very familiar with sequential mode. Sequential mode is just like a course. You go, you have 20 learning objects, you go through them, you complete them, you then take a test or get a certificate or something, right? But there is another mode called inquiry-based mode. And the best way to imagine inquiry-based mode, and a lot of learners really learn this way, is imagine, you feel you're about to get a job at, an amazing graphic design company, something, really up there. But now you really want to be impressive when you go to that job interview. So you decided, okay, let me learn about graphic design. So you are going to engage, not necessarily in a course, though you can take a course, but sometimes you'll notice that, okay, you take a course, it gives you the basics. I want to do something much more than that. So I'm going to go, look at designs from different people. I'm going to go, watch a lesson on YouTube on, how artists make impressive use of color. We call this inquiry-based mode because you are generating the questions and you are trying to learn to answer the questions that you generate. And basically, through these questions, you are trying to move from your initial state of knowledge to a new state of knowledge that you believe is going to make you impressive in that job or that job interview. And we refer to this as inquiry-based mode. Now, in reality, the very cool thing is that when you actually interview learners who take online courses, many of them will tell you that they usually do a mix of both. So many learners told us at Edraak that when they take Edraak courses, they find, the instructor mentions something, let's say in the first lecture, that the learners feel is interesting, and they just can't wait. So they take this topic, they go learn it somewhere else, and then they come back to the course. Or for instance, the learner couldn't understand something from the course, from that particular instructor, so they go and seek some videos on YouTube to learn that topic in a better way, perhaps. And we refer to this as the hybrid mode, or, which is the third mode. Now, we actually, the funniest thing is that so far most online learning platforms support only one way of how people learn, but we try to make it, a requirement. Since we're trying to do something across the Arab region, let's try to support on the platform all of the ways in which people try to achieve their goals, in which people try to learn. Right? And the basis on doing this is that by bringing this into the platform, now all of the data that you have of like what people are viewing outside, you now have this somehow inside the platform. Like you can let people search for YouTube content through a feature on the platform itself. So now this feature is going to go and search on YouTube using your keywords, and it's going to get you back the results. And you are going to view them in an iframe control on the platform. But the big thing that we now have is that we have data about what learners are looking for, how they are moving from video to video, what their interests are. And all of this can then translate into, okay, a lot of people seem interested in this thing. We don't have a course for that, but actually let's shift our minds now. It's not necessarily about the courses. Let's add or create an exercise or a new learning tool that people on Edraak can use to practice what they just watched in that video, even if that video is not part of an Edraak course, right? And basically we can prioritize, we can look at the videos or the paths that most learners are interested in. And so we can direct our engineering and content creation efforts to create learning tools around and grow learning assets around these topics, which are not actually Edraak courses. So that's a way in which, we learn from how people basically learn, to move outside from the conventional models of online courses and just start growing content and learning tools organically around where people are naturally interested. So this is just, very quickly the sequential mode. As I explained it, you move, from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, etc. This is like, inquiry based. So we bring it like onto the platform. We make it appear, to some extent, like you're searching for something, and then you can get actually results from YouTube. And then you can have, as I mentioned, the mixture of both. So if you struggle at a certain point, either now the platform can actually give you recommendations by looking at, what other learners searched for when they struggled at that lesson, and which of these videos that learners actually viewed when they struggled, seem to have had the best impact of learners. So like if learners basically searched on YouTube's 3 videos came up. But the second video, when people watched, they actually came back to the platform and then did really well on Object 3. That's how you can then take this YouTube content and then link it in the future or provide it as future recommendations for learners who struggle at Concept 3. So then we can actually change this, not only from like a recommendation system that sits on the side, but as I mentioned, you always want to improve your products. You always want to make your product have more impact on learners. And so if you are really reach to a point where you are confident that this external YouTube video is doing a really good job, you can then, as part of the technology, automatically embed this YouTube video on the learning path of any learner who struggles on Object 3. Right? And this is also part of, what we are trying to design in technology. Because first, there was common belief, in the early 2000s that, okay, just, let people create content, and then people are going to go and look at the data and, figure out, okay, when learners did this, they succeeded, so let's bring in this piece of content and, embed it into the course. And the assumption back then was that the content creators are going to follow up on the content and do these things. Now, most of the products that followed this assumption really didn't carry through because people get busy. People create the course and then get busy with other stuff. They usually have to take vacations from the other stuff to attend to create the course, the online course, and then they go back to the other stuff. And really MOOCs, haven't so far delivered on the promise that content is going to change and get continuously improved. And so one of the when we recognized this, we thought, okay, let's try to build a piece of technology that automates this part. And that basically, imports this content and engages courses in this continuous loop of automatic enhancement by incorporating seemingly effective external materials. Now, this is one aspect of how we wish to engage learners on our new platform. But basically, a lot of attention is also being devoted to creating rich forms of content. So you can have one concept, that is best. Basically, you can engage students the most when you start with a teaser question, give students a nice simulation or game that they can play, and give them a reward at the end that they actually can't achieve unless they play the game in a certain way that they apply, for instance, a certain thought or concept, right? So now learners are going to, maybe most of them are going to fail at completing this game, right? So now say, okay, now to learn how to do this task in a better way, let's move on to the next video. Right? And that could be the best instructional design for one concept. So we created the platform in a way that you can literally drag and drop all of these components and put them into lessons. So how a lesson looks to the student is completely up to the instructional designers. It can start with a game, then go to the video, then go to an exercise that measures that really learners understood the concept. We are using gamification, which of course, gamification, just to explain, is borrowing some of the things that work really well in games, like achieving badges, competing with others, and incorporating these into education or other fields. So the way this works is that you have like this elite community in the course. For instance, you have an elite forum that appears in gold, and you have a lot of like cool discussions directly with the instructor. But to actually be able to access this forum, you have to have the gold badge. And how do you achieve the gold badge? By answering, your first 100 questions correctly, for instance. And that's how, eventually you keep learners, working, getting rewards, and then transforming these rewards into something tangible that learners can then enjoy. And of course, the idea is, again, speaking, from human-centered design, we understand that gamification works for as long as really there is some satisfaction that happens to the learner. And so we try to translate this into the design of our technology by trying to make the badges eventually, as students learn on Edraak, lead towards more and more exposure to employers, exposure to job market. So eventually think that you keep earning badges and earning a new avatar, and your avatar keeps getting, more and more advanced until you become this rocket scientist. And then once you actually earn the rocket scientist avatar, we are actually going to send you for a job interview with, let's say, I don't know, let me just throw it out, NASA or something like that, right? But you have to be really outstanding, but that this will qualify you to a job interview at NASA or at Amazon or at Souk.com or anything, right? So just, to save time, I'm going to skip ahead. So this is basically like a lesson, that has like 4 components: a video followed by 2 exercises, followed by some text to motivate learners. Wow, great, you did a great job. Now you can actually, now you're able, to solve this type of problems. Go impress your friends by doing this and that. So, adding this human element as well to education. One of the really exciting things we're trying to work on is to change the video viewing experience. Because so far, the video viewing experience is about watching something online and then going and taking the exercise. Now, can we try to mess with this concept a little bit? Can we try to make it so that you are watching the video and you are interacting with something at the same time? So we had this, cool idea of trying to make learners interact with some objects in the video. So we create this notion of in-video questions, which, to be honest, isn't something new in Edraak. Many people did this before. But what we're trying to do new is to basically design questions that appear or overlay on top of the video. And then it seems as part of the video, and you can move your mouse and select an object or move an object from one place to another. So like in that chemistry lab that's behind the man here, so, you can like point on the one chemical that you think would be useful in solving this type of, criminal investigation, for instance. And so making people, touch and play with the items in the video, or, so it seems to learners, at least. So this is also, in the spirit of trying to see, how technology as we use it currently is a bit limited, and trying to basically improve upon it. Okay. So now I described a little bit about, the features of the technology that we want to provide. Again, at a high level, unfortunately, it's a much longer conversation, but we're trying just to highlight things. Let me talk for a few minutes about how we plan to integrate this into classrooms. And this is one form of blended learning modes. So as you guys are familiar already, blended learning involves some digital content being used in another instructional framework, like a classroom, for instance. So as I mentioned earlier, Edraak really wants to provide learners, or teachers with the ability to take 7th grade math for Jordan, as an example, okay, and create a classroom around that program. And then they can invite their students into that classroom. Now, what will happen is that once we allow teachers to do this, teachers can basically take all of the exercises, all of the videos, anything they want from that program, and start assigning them as activities or homeworks to their students. So also, one thing that we want to enable teachers to do is to create additional content in their classroom. So you're a teacher, you went to the 7th grade math for Jordan, you're teaching 7th grade in a school, you created a classroom for your own students, and then you notice, your students need something extra. So you want to create an additional exercise. You can do this and integrate it, or weave it into the rest of the program. And this is something that becomes only available for your own classroom. And then you can set, due dates as much as you want to give your students homeworks. You can change the names of, the headings to like week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. So, you can basically customize the program for your very specific instruction. Now, how are teachers going to use this in classroom? We are trying to push for many use modes. But one of them that I'm going to hand to you guys now in 2 minutes is that we want teachers to, assume you have schools, and really the Ministry of Education, Jordan, is doing a great job, and also in Egypt, they're about to do this, handing out devices that students can use in classrooms. So one mode of blended learning we're trying to work for is that teachers can create this content, right, and then assign it to students. So students can watch videos or take exercises in the classroom. So rather than the teacher explaining and then asking a question and then pointing to 1 or 2 students to answer, because in reality, a teacher cannot ask every student in the classroom to answer a certain question. What the teacher can do instead is they can explain something and then ask a question, and students should answer that question on their tablets, right? So now this becomes sort of like, and then the teacher can hold up their tablet with a dashboard that shows how many answered this, how many answered that. And this is not something really new, but what is new is when you think of this along with the other technology components that I talked about earlier. So you can imagine that it's not just like you're asking students a quick question, but you actually give them a 15-minute exercise, right? And then the teacher can now start seeing some students are doing really well. other students are struggling. They are unable to move past the first step of the exercise. So using the adaptive content feature that I talked about earlier, you can basically show a particular video specifically to the students who are struggling on step 1. To help them, for instance, give them a hint on step 1, help them understand more, and then help them, get beyond step 1 so they can catch up with their peers, and then, they can move on to step 2. Now, this is a point I'm going to ask you in a minute, because this is one of the ideas of the interaction design question that I want to share with you guys. But that's basically the concept. As we mentioned, the teacher should have a dashboard to show them the data in real time. Like, this is like, in the exercise, you had 5 questions, 70% of students answered question 1 correctly, 91% answered question 2 correctly, etc. Right? And then this is one view of the dashboard. If you wish, as a teacher, during the classroom, you can have a list of your students and you can see basically what any of these students is doing. Now, for time, I definitely don't want to go deeper into the, into the dashboards, but I basically just want, to recap just on what I said so far. We realized that, now we are having a unique opportunity to build something that we're working with ministries to push into schools in many countries in the Arab world. And we are targeting, 1.5 to 2 million, hopefully, maybe the first year, maybe more in next years. So we really want to make this something that works for the users. Now, if we look at, something like the dashboard that we have here, I'm going to give you guys a question and then we have like 10 minutes only, if not actually less, unfortunately. But the question specifically is, I'll leave you to think about this. If we have this dashboard, imagine you're a teacher, you give your students an exercise that has 5 parts, questions 1 to 5. And you have some of, as you can see, question 1, only 70% of the students got it right. So Genevieve, the numbers are in Arabic. That's the yellow bar. Okay. So basically, I want to see as a teacher, how many students answered incorrectly, and then basically what they did. Did they actually go and watch the video that was suggested? And then did they come back and answer correctly, the second time after they watched the video? So this is like something extra, right? Teachers want to know that. So how can I quickly, draft, if you guys can just, draft something on a paper, how should this look like? And how can it be something that teachers can basically use? Right? But also, I want you to maybe in a few minutes think about how can we extend this, right? We have the chance using technology to get students, for instance, who struggle at a certain point to team up together and work together, right? So what's one thought that Edraak you believe should work on? What's one way that people who have tablets can quickly come and form teams and, basically work together on parts that they have challenges on? Now, Genevieve, I don't know if I sort of like gave something that makes sense within the 5 minutes probably that we have remaining. And then if people can just quickly share some thoughts on the breakouts.
So can you just state it one more time so that we can make sure we're all on the same page?
Yeah, great. So let me try to state it a bit clearer. So the specific problem is that we have this dashboard, which is in front of us. It shows me how many students got each part of the exercise correct on the first attempt, for instance. But to me, as a teacher, this is limited information. I want to see maybe a more sophisticated dashboard that shows me, okay, so the people who answered question 1 incorrectly on the first attempt, what did they do afterwards in terms of like, did they keep retrying question 1, or did they actually watch the video that was recommended to them after they answered incorrectly the first time? And for those who viewed the video, did it actually work? What percentage of that answered correctly after they viewed the video? So that's the question. I think we only have time for that part. The specific ask is to sketch or think of how a more sophisticated dashboard would look like. It's like, how can we what we see in front of us to give something that provides this new piece of information.
Okay, so I've written that as best I can in the chat. If you want to take a look at that, Sharif. Everyone else, I'm going to open the breakout rooms. And if we could just take 5 minutes to go and think about how we might be able to help Edraak think through a slightly more complex dashboard that would give teachers more information, not only about whether students answered things correctly and incorrectly, but the pattern of behavior that got them to those correct or incorrect answers and what they did before and after. So I'll give 5 minutes. If you guys have a sheet of paper near you, you can just sketch something down in collaboration with whoever is in your breakout, and then we'll come back here and share, and then I have a few final announcements as well. So the breakouts are open. And if you want to coordinate in the chat, as always, about where to go, I see that Nora and Shireen have already done that. Okay, everyone, if you want to come back to the lobby, I'm going to close the breakouts now. Sharif, I've asked everyone if they could have designated one person from the breakouts to report back in the chat. So if you guys could all come back to the lobby and share one idea that your team had about how Edraak might be able to structure the dashboard such that it provided additional useful information to teachers, not just on whether students were correct or incorrect, but how they actually behaved both before and after. Sharif, I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about why Edraak thinks that this particular kind of information is important to teachers. Why is it important for teachers to know more than just like thumbs up, thumbs down, they got it?
Right. So I'm live now, right, JB?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So the reason is that basically, going back to like the basic of the basic goal that a teacher has is to identify where students struggle and help them overcome this struggle, especially because the next concept that they explain is going to depend on the previous. Now, technology plays a role here, right? Because we said that a teacher cannot attend student by student in the classroom. So you might have technology in the tool to automatically show the students something if they didn't get an exercise right? But that actually, the success of this whole model won't happen unless the content that's being served to the struggling students is effective. At addressing, the struggle that they fell in. And this is, this would basically be known when you see that, okay, students who answered this incorrectly, when they watched this video, they answered then correctly. And then you can compare like two videos that you have and pick the one that works better for the students. So that's an example of how this information could be useful to the teacher. It's still, I mean, maybe sometimes on the long run, but this is like long-run improvement, long-term improvement. But in terms of what happens inside the lesson, if I have a student who watched the video and is still struggling, maybe these one or two remaining students who are still struggling after the videos are the ones I can go and attend to in person and ensure that, now the whole class is really receiving the proper attention. So people who had no problem moved to question 2. People who had some issues and then answered correctly after watching the video, fine, they are now progressing. But there are some fewer learners now still struggling. And maybe I can, just call these learners, for a small team and basically help them in person more. So these are two quick applications of how this can be used.
That makes sense. I think we weren't probably able to give people quite enough time. So there's a lot of sort of just have more information, more categories on the dashboard. Bob suggested that you might be able to use AI and keystroke dynamics. And we're missing a few of the breakout sessions. And if people from those ones want to report back in the chat, we'd be very curious to hear if you came up with anything or if you have other questions or ideas that we could share with Edraak.
Right, and generally reading through some of the ideas that people posted on the chat, several people mentioned a very important point, which is, you basically need to click on a bar to access more information. And I think this in human-centered design is very important, because if you basically show all information for all bars at once, and it happened, it turns people away. People say, this is too complicated for me to work with. But if people see first, the overview, and then they can click on a bar and they can access more information for that bar, this helps people adopt the technology. So this was something that was very, very good to see that, people basically picked up through the chat messages.
Yeah, we heard something similar. We talked to Tembo Education, which is they send SMS messages to parents in Kenya or Nigeria. I think it's Nigeria, actually, the United States. And I think they're actually planning to move into Jordan with the refugee population to encourage parents to interact and sort of complete educational type activities with small children. And they were talking about how you need to make it sort of the lowest possible barrier. If you require as little behavioral change as possible, you increase the adoption or the likelihood of adoption that much more. The more you sort of ask people to change what they naturally do, the less likely they are to really come on board with your platform, which I thought was a good point.
Right, exactly.
So if you guys have, Basil had another idea, giving badges for those participating with questions, answers to, so this was responding to something else Sharif had written in the chat about how you might be able to provide additional sort of one-on-one support or more customized support to learners who might be struggling. So if you have any additional questions, if you want to type them in the chat right now for Sharif, I'm sure we can take a few minutes to respond to those. But I will take this moment to say a big thank you for sharing all about Edraak and the work you're doing and the work you're just sort of starting on in this direction. It was very interesting to learn about and really wonderful to see a use case that's so close to the kind of projects that we're thinking about and considering. So thank you very much for taking the time, Sharif.
And it's really been a pleasure and honor for me and for Edraak generally to be with all of you guys today. So thank you so much, Genevieve, for facilitating all of this.
Terrific. And hopefully for those of you that are with us in Amman in January, we'll get to see some more of Edraak there because they are also based in Amman. So I have two small announcements, one to the thing I just mentioned and then about the next challenge. So just to recap, tomorrow we will have our feedback seminar with Jackie Strucker from UNHCR and Philip, my colleague here at the Media Lab, giving some feedback on the human-centered design challenges. You then have the rest of the week to actually go out and user test what you've built and gain feedback. I'd really encourage you to use this as a learning experience and to be very responsive and really try and get people to give you not just sort of negative or not just positive, great work, this is really interesting feedback, but to really understand how they're using it, what's difficult for them, what surprised them, what their sort of suggestions would be, and to be very responsive to that. And then the deliverable for Sunday is a series of questions that we ask you to go through, having gotten some feedback from possible users. On Monday, we will start our next and final, actually, challenge, which is going to be around something that a lot of you mentioned in your applications as something you were excited about. Here, I'm going to switch over to my face so you can see me. Many of you mentioned that you were excited about the possibilities of AR and VR, and so we are going to be exploring how low-fidelity augmented and virtual reality could be used to support language learning for refugees. This is a little bit of a moonshot. It's not something a lot of work has been done, but we have some interesting people who have thought about it a little bit, and hopefully we will come up with some interesting ideas about how this sort of very new frontier technology could be used in a learning situation, but also very specifically to support refugees. And so thinking about phones and tech specs and all of that. So that will be starting on Monday, and our first seminar will be at the usual time on Tuesday. And I will confirm for you closer to the date who our speakers will be, because I'm still getting all our ducks in a row on that. And then also probably next Monday, or if not Monday, towards the end of next week, we will be putting out an application for the next phase of the accelerator. So it will be a sort of relatively short form, I imagine, just asking you to indicate if you're interested in joining us for a week in Amman in January. I will confirm the exact dates. It's around the 20th to the 25th. And if you're interested, how much of your team would be able to come, and maybe giving us a little bit of an idea of something you've learned here, something you'd look forward to working on. The requirements are that you have been an active participant in the online seminars, which obviously, or in the online course, which we can gauge fairly easily based on your participation and the things you've turned in. So that is open to all of you if you're interested, and you will have more information about that hopefully early next week. If you have questions, concerns, want to know more about what we're planning so that you can decide if it's worth taking some time off potentially from work, let us know. We will be covering the cost of flights, hotels, visas, etc. But unfortunately, it's not stipended. So if you had to take time off work, that would be up to you as to whether that was worth it. But yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions. Very much looking forward to talking about your prototypes and humans and your sort of use of human-centered design tomorrow. So a big final thank you to Sharif, and I will see you all tomorrow, same time, same place.
Thank you, Genevieve. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.